Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this panel, which, as you can see, is called Storytelling Through Audio, the Hidden Narrative. And so, as Stephen said, I'm Seoirse Dunbar, the host of the Adventure Games podcast. And well, I was wondering if you guys wanted to introduce yourselves very quickly and just mention the last game that you worked on, which we can't see up here, but just introduce yourselves very, very quickly. So, Thomas, do you want us to start with you?
Sure, thank you. My name is Thomas Regin, and I'm a composer for primarily Jedi at the moment. Hi, Dave. And the last game I've worked on is All Skies, and I'm currently working on a game called Guilt, which is a newcomer from Jedi. So, very nice.
Hi, I am Mark Benis. I am the composer for Rosewater and Lamplight City by Francisco Gonzalez of Grunstav Games. There he is. Hello. And I'm also a developer, and I've worked on a recent game called Once Upon a Jester, which is also an adventure game. Yes.
Very good.
Hogging the mic. Hello, my name's Jade. I'm what you call a generalist composer. So I've done a bit in games, film, but I'm actually mostly in theatre now, surprisingly enough. Big up Asian Pirate Musical. I actually started off here at AdventureX showcasing my game like 11, 12 years ago, so that's what I've been up to. So yeah, kind of a composer in games, but also not quite at this moment in time. Yeah, I've done a little bit of production work for Tales of Kenzera and a bit of consultation work for Assassin's Creed Shadows, so yeah, not quite the composer for those two games though, fortunately. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Paul Zimmerman, or you can also call me Paul, whatever you prefer. I'm a composer for games, not only adventure games, all kinds of games. What you specific people might know me most for would be Loco Motive. Other games have been Wild Frost, which is a roguelike deck builder, and Space Haven, which is ambient kind of space simulation game. So wide range of things.
Thank you for that, guys. So the first question, I know we probably spoke a little bit about it with Jade, but curious, how did you get started in doing music and audio for the games? And I suppose then the second part of that question is, how do you get involved in your most recent games? So Mark, we'll start with you this time. Started with Thomas last time, to give him a bit of a break. How do you get started in doing audio for, did you mention Lamplight City?
Yeah, exactly. So Lamplight City was actually, I would say, the first big commercial game I worked on. And I remember meeting Francisco for the first time. I had freshly moved to New York City, and I had met him at a convention there where he was showcasing an early build. And I think as a composer, I don't know if there's composers in this room, but getting started can be very difficult because you need to have a portfolio ready. You need to be able to present something to a fresh developer who is going to trust ultimately their child, basically, with you to score. So I had met Francisco at one of these events and played through the game, didn't have music, and kind of asked the age-old question, do you have a composer? Here's some music that I thought would really fit it, and kind of blossomed from there. And in terms of the most recent game, it was actually also with Francisco, Rosewater, which came out a few months ago, or I guess March, yeah. And so yeah, so I've kind of started with Francisco, working with him, and being able to have that collaboration continue has definitely helped me as a composer to grow. And yeah, it's been a great journey.
Very cool. So the way I got started in games music that's a long time ago. It's been 20 years. Almost 20 years. Almost 20 years. And I had a friend who Dave Gilbert from Jedi Games asked him if he would do the music for a game called Blackwell Unbound. Unfortunately, my friend couldn't do it, so he referred to me, and it's been like a Williams Spielberg relationship since then. And I guess my latest project was All Skies, and it was just a natural thing since we've been working together for so long. So Dave asked me if I wanted to do All Skies as well, and that's how that came about. So yeah.
Yeah, Paul, do you want to?
Oh yeah, sure. I started music when I was 15 in band context. I wanted to become a rock star. That didn't really work out. And I don't know, while I was always playing games, I was always playing music, but for some reason the connection between the two in terms of I could do this as a job took me a while to kind of realize. Also in a way because it doesn't really feel like a real job. Sometimes it is a lot of work, but it doesn't really. In school and university, we didn't really have people that, like us now, talked about it. So I never really felt like it is a viable career path. But I was always playing games and playing indie games. And at some point, I was like similar to you guys. I just wrote to the developer who I saw was working on a new game. And I was like, hey, I'm writing music. I've never written music for a game before, but can I do yours? And they said yes for some reason. Speaking of imposter syndrome, and here we are 10 years later.
I actually started off by making my own game. It was a point-and-click adventure as well. I showcased here many years ago. Didn't quite work out, but it gave me the tool set that I needed to think about how music works in games in that particular context. I also did the same thing of just writing to a developer and be like, but I didn't ask for work or anything. It was more like, hey, can I ask your opinion about my portfolio? And they actually liked what they did, and that was my first commercial gig. And then since then, I'm not currently writing music for games, but now more in the theatre space, which is a similar skill set with we don't know what the audience will do. So exactly. Yeah, so that's my humble beginnings. Yeah.
Well, thank you. Now, it's very interesting experiences from all of you. Another thing I'm curious about is how do you collaborate with developers? Some of you have worked on your own games, and some of you worked a long time as well. But I suppose we can start with Jade, because, sorry, I'll go back to you now again, that you've worked on some pretty big projects like, Assassin's Creed and Tales of Kenzera. So how does that collaboration look like with such a big team? How did that work with you?
The first bit is just basically just having a really big network of people and being very, not persistent, but more like showing up to events like this, and then eventually other people will remember you. And if say like I specialize in working with a lot of ethnic instruments, especially that from East and Southeast Asia, so working on Tales of Kenzera with Nanita Desai, that was really interesting because both of us come from a place where we work with a lot of ethnic instruments, so we know that, okay, it's very important to respect the culture of those instruments. Same thing with Assassin's Creed. It was more like a consultation thing. So whilst it was a very, very big team in those respective studios and different scales, the actual audio and music team was still, the one person or the two people. And then we just talked about what they wanted to get out of the session. And then I just gave some consultation. So that's it, really, yeah.
And before we go to Paul, just asking you about working in theatre. How do you find that compared to working on games for the audience?
It's just as chaotic, basically, just as chaotic. It's a very, very similar landscape where people are also looking for funding, but it's still a very passionate industry, and you still need to, like in games, you work with different stakeholders. Like, are you working with the director or the movement director and lighting, and then the tech as well? It's also more chaotic in that sense because, like, are you working in a 50-seater theatre or a 300 theatre? Then there's a lot of different sound systems there that you need to take into consideration. So yeah, chaotic. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And then Paul, same question for you, because you worked, as we see, on Loco Motive. Was your first time working with the Rishi's brothers. So how did you, when you spoke to us about how you start, but how did you collaborate with them? How did you work with them? Because I believe it was their first full game. So how was that process for you?
Adam is looking at me shyly. peeking around the corner. I think working with developers, it's always, especially with music, because we've talked about this earlier, where it's tricky to really talk about music oftentimes, to really quantify it or talk about it. And oftentimes the first contact with a new developer for me is to kind of find our way of communication about music. Like, it could be maybe they have certain references, or they talk about the emotion they want to convey with the music. So it's kind of like in those beginning stages, finding out how they talk about music, how they feel about music. So that is always different with every developer. And in the case, well, you asked about Adam and Joseph and Loco Motive. What was great there is that we came from a very similar background of the kind of games we love, like the 90s LucasArts, very classic point-and-click adventure games. And I feel like from the very get-go, it was very much like we were on the same page in terms of what we want to achieve musically, how it should feel, how it should play with the comedy of the game. And I guess that's why I got hired, because we think alike, I hope.
Well, it turned out well anyways. No, thank you. And then for you guys, Thomas and Mark, you guys have worked for, Thomas, Steak, you've worked for a long time, as mentioned, with Dave and with Wajidai. So presumably there's an element of trust there now, that you both trust each other to work together, hopefully.
Sure.
So how do you find now working so long with Dave and Wajidai with the games? Do you find it easier now, or is there any challenges, or...?
I mean, it's still challenging. Writing music is a challenge, and music is very subjective. Sometimes it's a hit and miss. And I mean, Dave's and my collaboration works pretty well, I think. But I still vividly remember writing like a death track from Blackwell Unbound, and the only feedback I got from Dave was synthy. So, and I mean, that's a good thing. I mean, it's something that you learn over the years to you know, if Dave hadn't liked it, he would have said, I don't like this, and I would have remade it, and so on. So it's kind of a work in progress. You know, the whole writing music is not just a single person job. It's something that you work together on. It's a two-way communication, and that's it's a process. So and it's a process that I really like, and yeah, it's been working out so far, I think.
Yeah, I can say that. 20 odd years with Wajidai games. They're okay, aren't they? Yeah, they're very good. But and then Mark, similar again, he worked, you know, with Francisco Gonzalez on his 2 games now. And, you know, Francisco was a very experienced developer before he started working with you. So how was it again collaborating, you know, with him? And I believe you collaborated with other musicians for Rosewater. So how has that process been like?
Yeah, definitely. I think to touch on what my other panelists have mentioned, you know, the process of working with a developer as a composer really involves a lot of trust. And when you first start working together, I think something Paul has mentioned just in our personal talks that can feel very much like a first date, where you're kind of testing like, oh, you know, how do I communicate with this person? Or, you know, do I need to make my music all polished and finalized, or are they more okay if I just send a sketch over? And especially working with Francisco on Rosewater now that we have all that experience working together, you know, we have that camaraderie and that understanding where, you know, there could be times where, you know, I send a really rough idea and he's just like, yeah, great, keep going, Mark. You know, and whereas if I just started with another developer, I might be more self-conscious and think, oh, I need to make sure this is a little bit more perfect. But, you know, now that we have that understanding, that working relationship, you know, whenever he sends me like a one-word response, like good, you know, I'm like, oh, great, thank you. So yeah, I think tie into that. Also, something we've started doing more is bringing in live musicians. So that throws another piece in the puzzle where you want to record with people. And similarly, when you're recording with musicians, you know, you want to find people that you trust as the composer, you know, because it can be challenging where, you know, and this is something we've also talked about personally, where, Sometimes if you record with someone and you don't get the end result you imagine, that can be a bit difficult because then you're thinking, do I need to re-record with a different musician, or could I have planned it a bit better? Could I have redone my sheet music so that I was more prepared when I actually recorded with them? So there's a lot of factors when you actually do end up recording with live musicians, but I have to say, when you do record with them, it adds so much more to the soundtrack, and it was worth that extra effort.
Can I quickly add a really funny story?
Yes, go ahead.
I think the collaboration process is definitely more based on that first date. I'm going to go with that. The first date communication, yeah. Especially when the client or the developer may not know a lot of music terminology, and they can often use it quite wrong. But an open question to my fellow panelists: have you ever had the feedback of like, can you make your music sound more blue? So yeah, that's what I mean by, I think the collaboration process is basically on the foundation of a really good communication system. However that may look like, because when I first got that feedback, I'm like, I have no idea how to approach this. But through a lot of backwards and forwards and a little bit of workshopping here and there, we finally managed to get it. So it was just like a very instrumental palette that they wanted, but they couldn't articulate it in a way that makes sense to me. So that was basically a process. So yeah, that's my funny story. Yeah.
No, that's a good point, and it's good to you, Mark, there.
Yeah,
How do you work with someone who mightn't know as much, because it's a specialist topic? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. Because I think that's a really great point that you bring up. And just to jump in on that, I think a universal language that every human can speak is emotion. So really, when people are trying to use the word blue or things, they really mean maybe something like sad or morose. And I think if you can, if there are, again, composers in this room who are trying to work with developers, every developer can speak an emotion. It's the easiest thing that all humans can speak in. So shifting the conversation in that direction, I think will help you and the developer get on the same page.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for that. So, and then another question, I think it's the business side of working, with composing and doing audio for games is, I suppose and you don't want to go into details about the money or anything, but I suppose the question is, how do you know how much you're worth, and then putting that forward to developers you're working with, and then, with contracts and negotiations. So how do you guys approach that? Because I'm sure, I don't know if people have heard, we'll pay you with exposure. But then you're like, well, I need money to live. So I suppose, how do you approach that, the business side, to know how much you're worth then, and with negotiations with developers, especially the first time. So I don't know if, Paul, if you wanted to speak. Again, you don't need to go into detail. But
Sure, I have no idea. For me, it's been 10 years, and I feel like it's been such a long process in a way, because the business side of it came much later. I was much more obviously interested in the music part, but at some point I decided I want to make a living with this. And then suddenly you're like, okay, I have to do business as well. Like, I have to charge for this. I have to calculate my expenses, blah, blah, blah. And I think it was a learning process just as much as learning to write music. It was a learning process just as much to do business, basically, to find out about contracts, to find out how much I can charge or should charge. And I still don't know if I'm doing that right, because sometimes I have conversation with other composers, and suddenly they charge way more, and I'm like, oh, okay, could I have done that? I didn't know there was an option. And there's also many different models. Like we talked earlier with Thomas, like there's revenue share models where you get maybe a certain cut from the game itself, or you have revenue share on the soundtrack, because after you release the game, the soundtrack itself can be a product in a way where the soundtrack is on streaming, Spotify, etc. You can sell it on Steam. And I think one of the most important parts I kind of found was I need to kind of have an insurances in place for all kinds of possibilities. And what I mean by that is, contractually, you need to think about what could happen. You don't know, maybe it's going to be a small game, but maybe it's going to be a big hit. Do you want to give away the rights to your music? If you have to give the rights away to your music, then you should charge X amount more. So it's kind of like you really need to think about the longevity of the music, because it can last many years after the game initially released, that people still listen to the music, still buy the soundtracks, and you kind of want to be prepared for those moments as well. I don't know if that answered anything.
I totally agree. I think, the only product that we have is the music, and if we can keep the rights to the music, that is super important, because that is our product. So I completely agree that this is a very important factor. So otherwise, I don't have much to add. It's
Thanks, Thomas.
you took the words out of my mouth.
Anybody else, Mark or Jade, to add? Or?
Go first? Yeah, sure. Yeah, go for it.
The only thing I would maybe add is to help from the perspective of a developer looking for a composer. I think that might be a challenge if you're a new developer and you don't know how to approach that conversation. So to just maybe give like a very quick explanation of certain options you can have as a developer. And something these two gentlemen just explained, there's two kind of basic options where you can license out your music, or you can do a work for hire where the developer will own all of the music. But if the composer licenses the music, that allows them to monetize the soundtrack. So say if the composer put the soundtrack on Spotify, etc., then they can keep those profits. And that would be a lower price than if it was a work for hire where you, the developer, bought out all of the music. So that's a very basic kind of two options you have. And then, another thing that Paul mentioned is like rev share versus upfront payment, where, you'll see a lot of larger companies not want to do a rev share. Like, who's going to get 5% of Assassin's Creed? I don't think any composer is going to get that. So in those cases, that's more of an upfront. But when you have smaller games, indie games, and maybe you don't have the capital to pay your composer, X amount, you could say, oh, would you accept half your rate, but I'll split some of the revenue share once the game sells. So when you talk to a composer, think of it more as you have a lot of levers that you can move up and down to negotiate with them. It doesn't have to be like, oh, if I don't have $10,000 or some arbitrary amount of money, then I can't have a composer. It's, yes, you can have a composer, you just need to learn how to talk to them and how you can negotiate and make compromises on both sides.
Yeah. One thing I would like to add, and I agree with everything that was said here, is that you can look up websites like the Musicians Union, where they have basic union rates if you want to actually look at certain figures. It's still a little bit behind compared to game rates, whatever that may look like, because the games industry is a little bit Wild West. There's no a catch-all system to help monetize that for everyone, then that would make everyone happy. So if you are looking at concrete numbers, that's a good resource to look at just to get an idea. Also, for developers out there who are thinking about working with a composer, maybe also think about whether you have the budget for live musicians, where it would immediately elevate the quality of the music, but that is adding another few steps into the process, and then you need to account the budget a little bit for those steps. So have a think about all of those aspects, and then obviously the sheet music preparation, which is another step. Yes. And then recording and mixing as well. So make sure you understand the whole music process, and then that would hopefully help you figure out your budget. I don't know if that's helpful, but I hope it is. Yeah.
I think so, thank you. Now, I've spoken a lot about music, but I believe some of you, at least not all of you, do other audio design work as well as music. And that's something a lot of people think is you just do music, but you do other stuff. So what can you tell us about what other work that you do? Maybe Mark, if you wanted to start, talk about what other audio design work you do.
Sure, so I've also done sound design and also dialogue editing. So taking recordings of a voice actor and cutting it up so that it's ready for, for in-game use. And ironically, I also did some work with Wajidai on the upcoming Nighthawks, which is a very exciting vampire kind of styled adventure game coming up, and that was actually a lot of fun. Where as a composer, you kind of get stuck kind of working in a certain routine, in a certain methodology. So being able to kind of switch your brain to different types of work actually, I think, can help you be more well balanced and not see exhaust yourself only composing or only mixing. So I do think it's useful to build up those other skills so that you can kind of shift gears in some ways. And also, sometimes you're not always going to have composition work, at your door. So it does give you a more well-rounded options. So, yeah. Do you want to talk about that, Jaden?
Oh,
Yeah.
Now this is where I've really spread myself thin in lots of different areas of audio. So I've done arrangement work where I've taken someone else's composition and I arranged it for a live music performance, for example. There's always teaching, consultation, and I also do audio production stuff. So that's basically like asset management. You're going to be dealing with hundreds or thousands of audio assets, and you need to do version control with that, and that's just the files. But then there's also like maybe budgeting for the audio team as well, just because they're like, hey, we need to buy some new software. The software needs to update its license or some new equipment or instruments. There's that element. And I also perform as well. Drums are my main instrument, Japanese taiko drums. They're really fun. So yeah, that's what I do. Yeah, so a little bit of everything that I do. Yeah.
So yeah, multi-talented, we can say. So Paul, do you do anything else as well?
Well, I only write music, but I do implement the music in audio middleware. So in my case, it would be mostly Fmod. So for a game like Loco Motive, I write the music, I implement it in Fmod so that our programmer can then quite easily implement it into Unity. And so we can kind of build adaptive music systems, even if it's just simple layering of tracks, switching up tracks. In Loco Motive, for example, we have cutscenes playing, but since the game is very text heavy, the speed of the cutscene or how it progresses kind of depends on how quickly players go through the text, kind of, like you can skip ahead. So the music kind of needs to be prepared for that. The music needs to kind of loop and then only continue when we want it to continue, and Fmod was a huge help in making sure that works most of the time.
Thomas, do you want to add anything?
No.
Thanks, Thomas. Very helpful.
Maybe we should start with Thomas the next round.
No, I don't do much else but write the music. So I feel almost kind of, I don't know, a little bit intimidated here. So I just write music and someone else implements it, and I don't do sound effects. So I'm just a boring old composer.
It is already a lot of work.
Yes, that isn't a lot of work.
Well, okay. Well, sticking with you, Thomas. Now we can, because one thing you guys mentioned is working on a budget. That I'm sure you probably all love to have like a full orchestra, like Hans Zimmer maybe. But how do you guys work, on the soundtrack and music on a tight budget, for an adventure game? So we can start with you, Thomas.
Sure. Well, it's really when you work on a tight budget and you cannot afford live musicians, then you have to think outside of the box. The way that I usually deal with that is to make things sound deliberately electronic. I try to work with the technology and not try to make things sound super real. And it's been working for me, I think, because I don't have the luxury of working that often with live musicians. Sometimes I do, but most of the times I don't. So I've had to sort of develop what I sort of feel is my own style of music that is sort of it's working for the games without sounding ridiculous. So yeah, that's my experience.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, do you want to That's
Yeah.
what your experience working on a budget. I mean, like, well, Rosewater in particular now sounded absolutely fantastic. But how did you, again, work to a tight budget and make
Definitely.
it sound as
Yeah.
good as it does?
Thank you. When we talk about budget, I think that kind of opens up the larger umbrella term of limitations. And whether we're writing for an indie game or we're Hans Zimmer with a massive budget, we're still working with limitations. That could be limitations of time, limitations of, financial limitations. So, whether or not you're actually, on an indie team, those are always going to be present. So for Rosewater, when it came to budget and limitations, we kind of spoke from the start, actually, that we wanted to have a budget for live musicians. That was something which is kind of my dream as a composer, something Francisco actually asked for. He wanted live musicians from the start, and that's not something I'm going to argue. I'm like, oh, yes, okay, we'll do it. Oh, don't say anything. So that was actually a blessing for me. But definitely when you're considering, okay, now we have a budget for live musicians, now you have to decide what tracks are going to have live musicians, what players are you going to bring on? Are you, does it make sense to bring on someone who can play both violin and viola, so you can get both instruments? In the case of Rosewater, we have Zach Singer, who's an incredible winds player, and ended up playing flute, shakuhachi, alto flute, and those are the three instruments I mainly had in play. But he can play all sorts of other winds. So being economical with who you bring on, people who can play multiple instruments can be more efficient. But also, if you're going for a musician that's, kind of higher end or, in the union, then you have to go by union rates. So like Zach Singer is union, and so that comes with certain requirements like a minimum session time. I don't remember the exacts, but you have to factor that in. And then if they double on multiple instruments, so if they're playing multiple instruments in the same session, that actually adds on a percentage multiplier. So, if he plays 3 instruments, that's a certain amount, but if he plays 4 instruments on the session, that'll increase. So those are certain factors you do need to take into account. But obviously, for Rosewater, I found a way to make that work and also bring on a couple other players, Clark Abood on guitar. He's a fantastic composer in his own right. You might know him for Slay the Spire, incredible musician. And then I also had a violinist there playing. So I think finding that middle ground between what instruments are the most important for each track, obviously you can't have the whole thing be live unless you have a massive budget. So it's really finding a compromise between all those factors I just mentioned.
Thank you. And then you guys, Paul?
Sure. I guess 2 things. I really like Thomas' approach, where it's kind of like, it's not necessarily a question of good or bad always. It's a question about aesthetics as well. Like, I'm always a big sucker for like sampled orchestral tracks, because I kind of grew up on that aesthetic, like 16-bit, like RPG music and stuff like that. And at the same time, I think if you want to bring live elements into your tracks and do it on a very tight budget, even a little shaker egg can do a lot. Like, this is what I kind of did on Loco Motive and other soundtracks, where I can play bass, guitar. I'm not a percussionist, but I can play a shaker, or even some voices. I think I have some kazoos in Loco Motive as well. It's kind of like just one kind of human element that is a bit more imperfect than the samples already does a lot. And obviously, if you then continue to add on more and you get an amazing developer who has the budget for live musicians, then even better. But yeah, you can really do a lot, I guess, with very little as well.
Maybe another thing that I can possibly add is also having a smart music system design, which would allow everyone to reuse the audio assets. You can make the audio assets a little bit more granular. Like, for example, let's say this music track has 8 different instruments playing. Maybe we can reuse those layers in like different parts of the game, and then we could build it up from there. So it's not really a lot more work. We just need to export the audio slightly differently, and then you can reuse it that way. So it's also just being maybe a little bit more smarter with your approach to what's happening in the actual system underneath the hood. So yeah, it just makes our work go a little bit more further, because at the end of the day, let's say we are only paid to write 15 minutes worth of music, but the gameplay is actually 2 hours. So yeah, there are other ways we can do about it from a technical point of view as well. And yeah.
No, thank you. Well, before we bring it to the audience, one question I'm curious then is, do you guys have any favourite scenes or moments in any of the games you've worked on that you... Thomas, it looks like you do.
No.
No? Helpful as always.
No, I mean, I have many favorite scenes. Just from Old Skies, I wrote this quite fun 1940s jazz ballad, which I'm kind of fond of, and I sort of reimagined that song for the end credits and wrote an orchestral arrangement for it and sang it together with the protagonist, the original singer from the other version in the game, and that's something that's super fun to work with and do. So that's one standout scene for me. Yeah.
Paul, just to
Yeah,
lift
sure.
things up a little bit.
Not necessarily a favorite scene, but in Loco Motive we have the train and every carriage has its own music. In the beginning I wanted to try to make the changes completely seamless, but I quickly ran into time issues because it was way too complicated. But eventually I ended up with a system that kind of works and it's kind of feels seamless between the carriages, and each carriage has its own kind of identity, so to speak. And I was just really happy when that kind of worked and I could run through the whole train and the music changes and is a bit randomized and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, Jade, do you any favorite moments?
Can I be cheeky and say 2 moments?
Yeah, go ahead.
So my first moment would be, getting my first commercial gig or gig in general, and just hearing my music being played in context is always like really, really powerful. It's just like, because it's like, yeah, you did it, you go girl. And then the second time was when my music was being performed live, and then actually being in the audience and seeing all the other audiences react around me. That was like, yeah, definitely my favorite. I think I made a few people cry. So like it was just like, like people actually having an emotional reaction. That's definitely my favorite part. Yeah.
They like to make people cry.
Yes. Good tears, good happy tears.
Thank you, Jade. And then finally, Mark, do you have any favorite moments, games that you've worked on to your music?
Yeah, I think the one that stands out recently is definitely the opening titles of Rosewater. I think I don't know if Francisco just read my mind when he started working on a Western game, but I love Westerns. I used to watch Shane as a kid, what is it, The Big Country, like that was just in my DNA before I even knew he was working on a Western. So to get to do my own kind of classic Western fanfare was a bit of like a check off my list as a composer for me. And also because it takes place in the same world as Lamplight City. That gave me some space actually to reference some of the music from Lamplight City and kind of connect the two in a very subtle way. I don't want to reveal anything, but that was a kind of a watershed moment for me. Like, oh, I got to do my own Western fanfare, and I think every composer has their little like list of things. Like, oh, I really want to do this, I really want to do that. So, yeah, that was one of mine.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Thomas, Mark, Jade, and Paul. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Do we have an MC, or I'll go up?
Thank you very much. I appreciate the discussion, very useful and intuitive. You talked a lot about the relation between the developers and the musicians and the audio engineers. I would like to go a little bit more in depth, specifically when talking to the creator of the game who has a good understanding of the characters and the story. but what happens when? To what extent information do you expect from him? When is it too small information, or when is it too much of information where you feel like, oh, he's actually telling me what to do? And so what is the perfect balance? And maybe what happens if this first date doesn't work? And how do you cope with that to move forward? Thank you very much.
That is a really good question, and every developer is different. I've worked with a ton of different developers over the years, and some developers are very specific. They will send you like an Excel chart with different tracks they want to have written, and they will state exactly what kind of emotion they would like to obtain, and then they will link some kind of music to you, like a YouTube video or what we call a temp track, which is some already existing track that they would like to get this type of music. And that, for some people, can be super helpful because, then you can just write whatever sounds like the temporary track. But then there are other developers who are not as rigid in terms of giving you instructions. And that is actually a lot harder, but also gives you more freedom to write, because then you have to use your own imagination to come up with a feeling for a specific situation. So you get to sort of decide what the player should feel in that particular situation. And it's very up to the individual composer how they like that style. I prefer that style because it gives me more personal freedom to decide what kind of emotion I want to convey in this situation, and then I will send it off to Dave Gilbert, and he will say to Cynthia, and I'll be like, oh, maybe you should have given me a list. No, I mean everyone's different, right? And I think as a developer, at least at the beginning of a relationship with a composer, you should do as much as you can to help him or her by writing a list of tracks that you want to have in the game and what kind of feeling you want them to convey. So that's usually very helpful in the beginning, and then gradually you can stop writing very detailed lists, maybe.
I'm actually a really big fan of mood boards. So just character artwork, colors. Yeah, that's really, really helpful for me, as well as like a Spotify mood playlist kind of thing. That's always really helpful because then it immediately tells me what kind of music or instrumental palette you're trying to get at. Like, even that means if you don't have the vocabulary to articulate exactly what you want, I can at least get the gist of it from character artwork, mood boards, even architecture. Buildings are quite helpful for me. Weather, anything really. I like color and movement as an inspiration, but that's just me personally. But maybe just ask the composer, what kind of material is helpful. Some composers just I just want the script and then that's it. Others are like me, where I just like looking at things and looking at the images and then writing and then just going from there. So yeah, everyone is different.
The only thing I might add is on the topic of references, sending a composer a list of tracks. I think that can be very helpful, but I think it's important not to be too attached to your references, where you don't necessarily want your composer to just, copy something, note for note, because then just hire the original composer of that reference you sent. But ultimately, when you're hiring a composer, you're really hiring like a team member. You're hiring someone with their own input, their own creative voice. And I think as a developer, even though it is your baby, it is your project, try to be open to someone bringing in a new voice into your project. Because I think that ultimately ends up with something a bit more powerful and, creative.
Can I just add something?
Yeah, go for it.
It reminds me of the time I worked on the Nancy Drew series, and they used one of my own tracks for reference in a later game. And that's something that the players have continued to complain about several years after, that those two tracks are very similar. But, you know, I was just trying to write music that sounded like the 10th track, and it just happened to be mine. So.
Is there anybody else who has any questions? Or yeah?
Hi. So you were talking earlier about giving feedback, getting feedback from developers who don't understand what they're talking about, and specifically it sounds too blue, or to make it sound more blue. Sorry. How would you recommend somebody who doesn't understand how to compose to give better feedback to people who do?
Right. Yeah, I think we're coming back to the emotion essentially. Like, if you don't know the name of a certain instrument, if you don't know how to musically accurately describe it, it's much better for us, or at least for me, if you talk in emotion, if you talk in feeling. How should the players feel in this moment, or how should the music make you feel? Is the scene suspenseful? Is the music playing into that? Is it contrasting what is happening? That is usually much easier, because when you go into music terminology territory, it can become a bit tricky if you're using the wrong terms essentially to describe what you want. Like, for example, I might have a client where I have a cello in the track, and they might be like, I don't like the horn, and they mean the cello, but I don't know what to do with that information essentially. I kind of have to try to translate that, and it would be much easier maybe if they say the main line or whatever that is makes me feel a certain way, or I think it's a bit too scratchy. These kind of things for me usually really work.
Yes, going back to the emotional chart, it's like this track needs to make me feel angry, and then I'll be like, okay, but what kind of anger? Is it like explosive table flipping anger and thrashing the place about, or is it like the kind of, I'm just going to be like standing in the corner and seethe kind of anger and rage? So that's one point. The second point is I actually did a workshop with this particular client, and we basically listened to the same music track, and then we wrote word association clouds. And then after listening for a minute, we just circled the words that appeared in both my word cloud and the client's word cloud. And then from there, we can have a shared language of okay, this particular track made me feel in a certain way. It brought up these very specific imagery of walking in the forest in the rain at night, moonlight or something. So okay, this is the audio palette for that particular scenery. So that's what that answer was like. Can you make it feel more blue? It's just you want it to be a bit more vibey actually, based on this process that I did with the client. So maybe that's a hot tip. If you don't have the words to articulate that, do this kind of word association exercise by listening to other music tracks together, and then try to figure out what is the shared language between yourself and the other person. Yeah, I cracked it.
I might try that, thank you.
Welcome.
And I'm back. I think that's all we have time for, I think. Well, thank you to the audience members for the questions, and thank you to Thomas, Mark, Jade, and Paul. I hope everyone enjoyed that panel. I hope it was beneficial and helpful to everybody. And thank you everyone for coming, and thank you to AdventureX for hosting us.
Thank you.